We all know who killed Goliath, right? Well, I thought I did until I realized that the writers of the story were not always on the same page. I'm Ross Nichols for Horeb Institute, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is Sunday School. You know, it's probably the best known story in all the Bible. Everyone knows the story about David and Goliath. David, the Bible's greatest hero. It's not even arguable. He is clearly the most frequently mentioned person in biblical history. And here we have David, the son of Jesse, of Bethlehem, of Judah. This particular person, David, the young shepherd boy, the story goes something like this. David's older brothers are at war. They're at war with the Philistines. They're in the valley of Elah. I've been there plenty of times. Some of you have been there as well. I've looked around and I've seen the spot and imagined the war. So here they are. Saul is the commander, Saul is the king, and all of David's older brothers, or at least some of his older brothers, are there on the battlefield. And Jesse, David's father, sends the young boy to check on his brothers. He sends with them. He sends them bread for the brothers and sends cheeses for the commanders, sends him on his way. He takes off on the mission. Now, in this particular story, when David arrives, the battle is ongoing. In fact, he arrives at the time where the troops are lining up. The battle lines are drawn. You have the Philistines on one side, and you have the Israelites on the other side. He gets there. You can imagine he's young, he's excited, he's courageous. He wants to be a part of the action, and action is all in front of him. I've often tried to imagine the sounds and the sights that young David saw. And while he's there, he looks around, he leaves his bags with someone to put up, he drops them, and in all of those people, he begins to search frantically. He's looking for his brothers. Somehow, according to the narrative, he finds his brothers, makes his way to them, and he greets them. Now, this is where the story gets extremely exciting, because while he's talking to his brothers, there he shows up. There he is. And I can imagine, even from my youth, I can imagine this scene in my head, especially having been there in the Valley of Elah, this massive man, Goliath in Hebrew, we call him Goliath in English. Goliath walks out from the ranks of the Philistine soldiers. He walks into that ground in between the Philistine soldiers and the Israelites, and that is where our story picks up. By the way, one of the things that I wanted to say is the reason that I can imagine this scene, and many of you can, is because of movies that we've seen and books that we've read. In fact, I have my Bible from when I was a little boy, and this particular picture is many picture Bibles, especially any children's Bible, is going to have the picture of David and Goliath. So when I began to put this class together, this is the picture I saw, but it's my Goliath. It's my David. Many of you have done the same. So when we imagine the Philistine champion walking out onto the battlefield in that open field, I want you to get what the biblical writers say about Goliath. So we're going to do a description. One of the descriptions that we have is from 1 Samuel chapter 17, and verse 4, beginning in verse 4. A champion of the Philistine forces stepped forward. This is what David sees. His name was Goliath of Gath. He was 6 cubits and a span tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a breastplate of scale armor. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a breastplate of scale armor, a bronze breastplate weighing 5,000 shekels. He had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung from his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's bar, and the iron head of his spear weighed 600 shekels. and the shield bearer marched in front of him. Now, just to let you know, let me kind of break that down for you, because first of all, it's a description of Goliath based on the cubits. Now, there's different calculations for a cubit, but let's just go roughly, sort of a middle ground. That would put Goliath at 9 feet tall, roughly 2.75 meters in height. The breastplate that he's wearing, it says it's 5,000 shekels in weight. It's about 130 pounds or 59 kilograms. We're talking a lot of armor. The head of his spear is 600 shekels, which is roughly 15 pounds, a little over 7 kilograms. Now, all of that would put terror in the hearts of men, and that's exactly the way the Bible describes it. Day after day, week after week, Goliath walks out onto the battlefield, and he challenges and he taunts and he mocks the God of Israel and the troops, the Israelite troops. He's mocking them day in, day out. But David, when he gets there, he's talking to his brothers. You can imagine the scene. And he hears the soldiers talking about the great reward that comes with the person who would defeat this giant. Here's what he hears. He hears of great riches. He hears that whoever would defeat this Goliath would also get the king's daughter in marriage. And his family, whoever the victor would be, whichever soldier could take Goliath out, his family would be free of taxation. Well, that's a pretty good deal. You can imagine a young, brave, courageous soldier hearing that he's going to get rich, he's going to have a king's daughter for a wife, and his family's free of taxation. This would inspire a lot, you would think. But not many take the challenge. But when word begins to spread, remember the brothers tell him, don't say that, David. You're always trying to get some attention, and you remember the back and forth, as brothers are wont to do. But the word does get back to King Saul. Some people, some of the soldiers, some of the commanders hear this. They bring it before Saul and tell them that there's a young boy in the crowd among the troops who has agreed. He's keen to fight the giant. Now, this is where we pick up our story next. I want you to go with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 through 40. And Jesse, let me scroll down to verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no man's courage fail him. Your servant will go and fight that Philistine." But Saul said to David, "You can't go to the Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy, and he's been a warrior since his youth." And David replied to Saul, "Your servant has been tending his father's sheep, and if a lion or a bear came and carried off an animal from the flock, I would go after it and fight it and rescue it from its mouth. And if it attacked me, I would seize it by the beard and strike it down and kill it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and that uncircumcised Philistine shall end up like one of them, for he has defied the ranks of the living God. The Lord," David went on, "who saved me from the lion and bear will also save me from that Philistine." "Then go," Saul said to David, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David in his garment. He placed a bronze helmet on his head and fastened a breastplate on him. David girded his sword over his garment, and then he tried to walk, but he was not used to it. David said to Saul, "I can't walk in these, for I'm not used to them." So David took them off. He took his stick, picked up a smooth stone from the wadi, put them in his pocket of his shepherd's bag, a sling in hand. He went toward the Philistine. So this is the scene. David tries on Saul's armor. Doesn't fit him right. It's not tested. He can't even move in it. It's probably way too big. Takes it off and he goes with what's comfortable for him. Picks up a couple of stones. By the way, for show and tell, this is sort of small. I'll hold it in front of my shirt so you can see the contrast. But this is a stone that I picked up in the valley of Eli, in that little dry wadi in that brook there, because I've often tried to imagine. I've brought back several of these and given them to friends. But I want to imagine how that story looked. I want to feel it. I want to think about it. So this is one of the stones from that brook. Don't get scared. I'm not going to throw it. Now, the showdown, it's a little bit longer, but I want to read that in full because it's really worth reading in full because you get an idea of the scene according to the biblical writer. So let's look at this particular passage. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning in verse 41. The Philistine, meanwhile, was coming closer to David, preceded by his shield bearer. When the Philistine caught sight of David, he scorned him, for he was but a boy, ruddy and handsome. The Philistine called out to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" The Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." And David replied to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the ranks of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day will the Lord deliver you into my hands. I will kill you, cut off your head, and I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. All the earth shall know that there is a God in Israel, and this whole assembly shall know that the Lord can give victory without sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hands." Then the Philistine began to advance toward him again. David quickly ran up to the battle line to face the Philistine. David put his hand into the bag. He took out a stone and slung it. It struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus David bested the Philistine with sling and stone. He struck him down and killed him. David had no sword. So David ran up and stood over the Philistine, grasped his sword, pulled it from its sheath, and with it he dispatched him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their warrior was dead, they ran. The men of Israel and Judah rose up with a war cry, and they pursued the Philistines all the way to Gai, up to the gates of Ekron. The Philistines fell mortally wounded along the road to Sha'arim, up to Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines and looted their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons in his own tent. So there you have the story according to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, this story is the way that most people remember the story. If you think about David and Goliath, you go through all the facts that we just covered. David's the youngest. His older brothers, at least some, are in the army under Saul, in the valley of Elah, under this huge antagonizing voice of Goliath. Day after day, David, the young shepherd boy, shows up, agrees to take the fight, and there you have it. Kills him with the stone, cuts off his head with the giant's own sword. And then it says he carries the head of Goliath back to Jerusalem. Now, I just want to point out, it's not the purpose of my class today, but I just want to highlight the fact that Jerusalem isn't really in the story until 2 Samuel 5. So most scholars would say that that part is anachronistic. But even that, I want you to think about it. This is the story that we all know and love. So take this as an opportunity to hit that like button and like the story, because that's the way we know it. It's the story of David defeating Goliath. But we know another story. We have another version, and one that I would say deserves a very close look. Most people don't really associate this story that I'm about to tell you with the one that I just told you. It's contained in a collection. It's contained in a collection of heroic feats by David's mighty men, David's warriors. Now, as you'll see, David is in the story, but again, these are four small accounts, four short accounts of feats, heroic feats by David's soldiers. This particular section of scripture that we're going to read together it also depicts Israel at war with the Philistines. Again, David is present. David is mentioned. And also in the story that we're about to read, we have on the other side, the opposing force opposite the Israelites, we have men of great stature, specifically Philistines, and even more specifically, Philistines who come from Gath, or Gat as it is in Hebrew. Now, this is the uncanny part. One of the opposing soldiers, one of the Philistines from Gath, is known, are you ready for this? By the name Goliath, Goliath, Goliath of Gath. So we have to read this story because there are so many details which seem to match what we read in 1 Samuel. So this story comes from 2 Samuel chapter 21, beginning in verse 15. 2 Samuel 21, beginning in verse 15, and it says the following. Again, war broke out between the Philistines and Israel, and David and the men with him went down and fought the Philistines. David grew weary, and Ishbi-Benob tried to kill David. He was a descendant of the Rapha. His bronze spear weighed 300 shekels, and he wore new armor. So this sounds like a fight between David and one of these big guys from Gath. Verse 17. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to his aid. He attacked the Philistine and killed him. It was then that David's men declared to him in an oath, "You shall not go with us into battle any more, lest you extinguish the light of Israel," the lamp of Israel. So David is told, you can't go into battle, not anymore, because you're the lamp of Israel, right? They don't want him to be extinguished. Story continues. After this, after David is told you can't go anymore, fighting broke out again with the Philistines at Gob. That was when Sibbechai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, the descendant of Rapha. And again, there was fighting with the Philistines of Gob, and Elkanah, son of Yaarioregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's bar. Once again, there was fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man who had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was descended from the Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. Those 4 were descended from the Rapha in Gath, and they fell by the hands of David and his men. The first thing I'd like to point out is this particular passage has some things that are quite interesting, very interesting. So let's kind of touch on those. So we have war with the Philistines. David is there. He's present. He's described. He and his mighty men are in the battle. And in these 4 accounts, David's part of the story. Although, and you need this in your notes, in verse 17, the boys, the mighty men, the warriors of David said, David, we don't want you to fight. We don't want to lose you. So they had him stay back, at least according to this passage. Now, in this particular passage, in one of these stories, we see mentioned Goliath of Gath. He's there. Notice that he has a spear that is like a weaver's beam or bar. And this particular Goliath of Gath is killed by someone from Bethlehem. Well, those stories are pretty interesting, and the details are very, in some cases, exactly like we read in 1 Samuel chapter 17. But this Goliath of Gath, during the time of David, with a spear shaft like a weaver's beam or bar, who was killed by a Bethlehemite warrior from Israel's army, was offed not by David, but Elkanah. Elkanah, who is Elkanah? And what are the chances that we have two Goliaths from Gath who fight and are killed by a Bethlehem warrior. It sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? So we find among David's warriors, we have two lists that I'm going to look at, that we're going to look at, that deal with David's warriors, that name these particular warriors. We're looking particularly for this Elkanah. Who is Elkanah? Now, as you know, almost in every class I bring up the book, A Synoptic Harmony of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. And if you have this book, you can read the story of the list in both Samuel and Chronicles of David's warriors. It's going to be a long list. It goes from page 69 all the way to page 73. Where I want to focus is we're looking for Elkanah, but let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 8, and 1 Chronicles 11 and 11. That's going to be on page 70 if you have Newsom's book. So I just want to pick it up where we see these are the names of the mighty men whom David had. In Chronicles, it says, this is the account of David's men, and they begin to list. Now, like most stories where we have two different sources recording people and places and events, narrative, whenever we have two different accounts, they are different. Oftentimes, there's quite a bit of difference there. So we're not expecting to find exact conformity. As you go through this, you'll see that the account in 2 Samuel has some things that the account in Chronicles doesn't have, and vice versa. But if we go down to verse 24 and verse 27 in the Chronicles, verse 26 in 1 Chronicles, it says, Elkanah, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. Elkanah is the one who is said to have defeated this Goliath of Gath. This name makes me wonder, is this who the story is about? Now, one other thing, while we're looking at the story that contains David's soldiers as mighty men, there's another person by the name of Benaiah. Benaiah, I want to go to this particular passage. If you have Newsom, it's on page 71. It's going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verses 20 through 23, and 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 22 through 25. So here's what we're going to read here. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. By the way, at this point, both accounts are exact. He smote 2 Ariels of Moab. He also went down and slew a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen, and he slew an Egyptian. 2 Samuel says he was a handsome man. 1 Chronicles says he was a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall. So Samuel doesn't know that this guy's that big. Samuel says the Egyptian had a spear in his hand. Chronicles adds, like a weaver's beam or a weaver's bar. But Benaiah went down to him with the staff, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and slew him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his guard, his bodyguard. So the reason I bring in Benaiah is because it uses a phrase that we don't see in many places in the Bible. In fact, we only see it in 4 places in the Bible. We see this particular Benaiah that when we read the part about the weaver's beam, the spear like a weaver's beam, this is quite interesting because it appears, and you'll see these in the chat, in 1 Samuel 17:7, where it's describing Goliath. Goliath of Gath. He has a spear like a weaver's beam. We also see it in 2 Samuel 21:19, the different version that we just read. We see it in 1 Chronicles 11 and verse 23, which describes Benaiah and this war with either a good-looking Egyptian, or maybe he's not so good-looking, but he's very big in stature, whichever one you go with. Maybe he's both. Maybe he's handsome and he's a big guy. Now, what I want to do now is look at the next occurrence. There are only 4 times where this spear like a weaver's beam shows up, and this is the next one. It's in 1 Chronicles chapter 20, beginning in verse 5. 1 Chronicles 20, beginning in verse 5, says the following. Again, there was fighting with the Philistines, and Elkanah, son of Yair, killed Lahmi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. His spear had a shaft like a weaver's beam. Now, we're going to come back to those names in a minute. Something sounds familiar. Once again, there was fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man who had 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand, 6 on each foot. He too was descended from the Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David, David's brother Shimei, killed him. These were descended from the Rapha and Gath, and they fell by the hands of David and his men. Well, that sounds pretty familiar. Now, I want to look at a couple of notes on this particular passage. And this particular note that I want to read first is from the JSB, the Jewish Study Bible. It's a note on 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 5. So let me get there. And here's what it says, because you'll notice the names are familiar. Here we go. In 2 Samuel, this is the note on verses 5 and 6. In 2 Samuel 21:19, it states that Elkanah, the son of Yaareh-Orgim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's bar. Now, this seems to contradict 1 Samuel 17, which states that David killed Goliath. Although it is likely that Samuel preserves 2 variant traditions, a rabbinic tradition, the Targum to 2 Samuel chapter 21, and Ruth Rabbah 2:2, claim that David and Elkanah were one and the same. So let me just tell you what that means if you didn't catch it. You have 2 different texts. One says that Elkanah killed Goliath of Gath, the Gittite. And one says David, one says Elkanah. So what the rabbinic tradition begins to try to make excuses for that, or to explain it, let's say, to be at the kindest we can be. And so the tradition begins to say, well, David and Elkanah, some called him David, some called him Elkanah. It's the same guy, because that was the way they had to say. They had to come up with some reason why 2 different names are attributed as being the slayer of Goliath the giant. Now, let me keep going. A similar position is adopted by some modern commentators who argue that David was a throne name while Elkanah was the king's given name. One medieval exegete argued that Goliath of 2 Samuel 21 was not the same Goliath referred to in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And it goes on and it says, more excuses. But alternatively, Chronicles may result from textual corruption or a different underlying text of 2 Samuel 21 and verse 17. So people are trying to explain why we have different people who get credit for killing the same guy. Now, there's one more that I want to show you. One more note that I want to read, and this one is from the NET Bible. It's on page 567. As always, anytime I reference a work in the class, the link will be in the description. So here's what it says. According to the name Yaareh-Orgim, Remember, it says it's talking about this particular person. But the second word, which means weavers, is probably accidentally included. It appears at the end of the verse. The term is omitted in the parallel account of 1 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 5, which has simply Yair. So one has Yair, the other has Ya'areh or Regim, but it's saying there must be a textual problem here. Let me keep going. The Hebrew text as it stands in 2 Samuel 21:19 reads, Elkanah, the son of Ya'areh or Regim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite. So who killed Goliath the Gittite? According to 1 Samuel 17, it was David who killed Goliath. But according to the Masoretic text of 2 Samuel 21:19, Elkanah killed him. Many scholars believe that the two passages are hopelessly at variance with one another. Others have proposed various solutions to the difficulty, such as identifying David with Elkanah or positing the existence of two Goliaths. Maybe there are two Goliaths and not just one that just happen to be warriors for the Philistines. They're from Gath. They're from the time of David. They have a spear the size or the weight of a weaver's bar. You know, I tell you. Now, here's the part that's interesting, and I'm going to show you in just a moment what it could be. There might be a textual transmission problem or an edit to one of the text or the other to try either to fix or maybe to cover for a discrepancy. And here's what this note says. The parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5, says that Elkanah, the son of Yair, killed Lahmi, the brother of Goliath. Both versions are textually suspect. The Chronicles text appears to have misread Bethlehemite as the accusative sign followed by a proper name, and it goes on and it gets into sort of a technical Hebrew point. What I want to do is show you these two texts. If I put them side by side, if you recognize the Hebrew in 2 Samuel 21:19 and the Hebrew in 1 Chronicles 20 and verse 5, they're very similar. Even if you don't know Hebrew, you can look at, for example, the last word in the phrase says Goliath in Hebrew. Well, that looks just like the one on 1 Chronicles, looks just like the one in 2 Samuel. Those two passages, and I'm really showing this for those who've studied the biblical Hebrew, you could almost see how close they are. Now, it only works in the Aramaic script, and that Aramaic script comes in the time of the Babylonian exile. So what this tells us is this text, if it became corrupt, whether accidentally or on purpose, it had to happen late in the biblical story. But I just wanted you to see how closely they look in Hebrew. The name Lahmi, the brother of Goliath, if you notice when it says the Bethlehemite, that has the exact same consonants, Lamed, Chet, Mem, Yud, as the name Lahmi. So is there really Lahmi, a named giant, the brother of Goliath, or is this somehow a textual corruption on purpose or accident? I think it clearly is. Now, there's more to the story. There are more difficulties involved. It's not so simple. David killed Goliath. We have other people who are said to have killed Goliath. There's just a lot of opportunity for error. Now, if we go back to the story that we know, and we look at it, there are problems in that story as well. I'll give you an example. If you go back and you read 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 14 through 23, and I'll put these texts in these particular passages in the comments. If you look at this, you're going to see the way the story unfolds. Saul is being tormented by an evil spirit. Remember, God takes his Holy Spirit from Saul, and there's this evil spirit that's tormenting Saul. Saul wants someone who is skilled to play the harp or the lyre so to chase off these evil spirits. And someone tells Saul, look, there is this kid, David, the son of Jesse. He's skilled in music. Saul says, go get him, bring him. And sure enough, he brings David to the court of Saul. And David, from that point on, according to 1 Samuel 16, 14 through 23, David is right there, strumming his harp, strumming his lyre, and it is something which comforts Saul. In fact, we read in that particular passage that Saul loves David, right? And we read that David becomes the armor bearer for Saul, and Saul keeps him with him. In other words, David remains with Saul. It says it very clearly. Now, if we go to 1 Samuel 17, verses 31 through 39, that doesn't know the part about David being with Saul all the time. In fact, David is not with Saul. We read in these passages that David goes back and forth. He spends some time with his father, and then sometimes he goes to see the boys and so forth. In fact, in this particular passage, in chapter 17, verse 31 through 39, we have this lengthy conversation between Saul and David. Saul, remember the part? We read it, where Saul tells him, put on my armor, try this, and he tries it, and it's just too big, it doesn't fit him. But clearly, you have this, Saul knows who this is. He's talking to him. And then when we get to 1 Samuel 17, verses 55 through 58, the scene of the battle, Saul is watching David as he defeats Goliath. But then something strange happens. He asks Abner, whose son is this youth? He doesn't even name him. It's almost like he doesn't even know who he is. You would think he would say, I forgot, whose son is David? Because he clearly knows David if you read the narrative, but he doesn't even know his name, or he doesn't refer to him by name. Whose son is this youth? And Abner says, I don't know. I don't know who he is. And then Saul later in the same narrative asked David, whose son are you? It's really strange. In fact, when I read this story, I suspect something is going on. Now, what that something is, I don't know that I know. I think I have some ideas. Let me ask you this. Is it possible that David was added to a story that was originally about a warrior named Elkanah who killed Goliath of Gath? Could that be possible? And if that's possible, maybe later writers tried to cover that up and either slightly change the name or say, no, I know it says Goliath of Gath, but this guy Elkanah, even though you read somewhere else that Elkanah killed Goliath, he actually killed the brother of. Could that be? But what other embellishments may have happened to the story? Now, we have a tendency as humans to make our heroes larger than life.
Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace.
William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard. Kills men by the hundred. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes and bolts of lightning from his arse.
As William Wallace grew, the legend of William Wallace that you just saw in this short clip, did the legend of David grow likewise? And speaking of growth, did Goliath grow? I mean, in the story, in the Masoretic text, we have very clearly, it says in the English, in the Hebrew, that Goliath is 6 cubits and a span. And I told you already that puts him roughly at 9 feet, a little bit taller than 9 feet. 2.8 to almost 3 meters in height. But that's not the only reading that we have. It's not the only text that we have. So the Masoretic text is very clear. He's 9 feet tall, roughly, give or take a few inches. That's a big, big man. But we also have other measurements, other heights for Goliath. In Josephus, in Antiquities 6:171, and in 4Q51, which is a Samuel text from Cave 4, 4Q Samuel A. In these texts, it says that Goliath is not 6 cubits in a span, but 4 cubits in a span. Now, 4 cubits in a span is nothing to laugh at. You know, I'm 5'8", so that's a big guy too. But 4 cubits in a span, depending on how you calculate a cubit, is going to be anywhere from like 6'4" to 6'9", about 1.9 to 2.1 meters roughly. There's still a big guy. But why do we have differences in the height? I guess the question that I have when I look at these differences, when I read these alternative facts, these variations on the details, I have to ask myself, did Goliath grow over time? Did the legend of David grow over time? Or perhaps both grew over time? Cubit by cubit, span by span, the story grew taller, and so did our man. Excuse that rhyme. I just thought it would be cool to put in. So those are some of my thoughts on who killed Goliath. Was it David? Was it Elkanah? Are they one and the same? You know, you've heard the different theories. What do you think? Leave your comments in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, like it, hype it, share it with others. But most of all, and as always, thank you for watching.